The greatest threat to a kingdom is not the enemy outside its walls, but the one soul inside who refuses to kneel. Now let that sit for a second. Because what if I told you the so-called elite groups don't fear armies, revolutions, or uprisings? They fear you. Not your silence, not your mistakes, not even your struggles, but the fact that you survived without them. And worse, you flourished. Here's a fact. History's most powerful systems, from royal bloodlines to corporate empires, have always relied on the same survival tactic, convincing everyone that their approval is the highest currency. Yet you came along, cashing checks they never wrote, opening doors they swore were locked, and breathing just fine without their oxygen tanks. And that's why you're not on their recruitment list, you're on their survival watch list. Because if too many people realize what you already know, that destiny doesn't require their stamp, then their whole structure collapses like a bad Jenga tower at a family reunion. Think about it. They built entire ceremonies to make people beg for inclusion, while you, unbothered, were out here sipping your tea like, oh, you're still waiting for permission slips? That's cute. And now your independence has them sweating harder than a billionaire caught with receipts at tax season. So let's peel back the velvet curtain. This isn't about you being left out. It's about them scrambling to survive the fact that you can't be bought, sold, or scripted. Welcome to the Blacklist file. Number 1, you don't threaten their power, you threaten their dependency. You don't threaten their power, you threaten their dependency. That's the piece nobody talks about. Power on its own isn't stable, it needs a host. It needs people to lean on it, bow to it, believe in it. Without that dependency, power is just an empty costume, a badge with no meaning. And that's exactly why elite groups are so uneasy when it comes to you. You refuse to live independence. You've proven that a person can build, endure, and even rise without pledging allegiance to their systems. That fact alone shakes the ground they stand on. Think about how their world operates. Every policy, every ritual, every carefully designed structure is made to funnel people into believing they need their approval to survive. They built industries around being the middleman for success, middleman for recognition, middleman for worth. They market themselves as gatekeepers, the ones who hold the keys. And then you come along, not asking for keys, not waiting for permission, just walking in your own direction as if their gates never existed. To them, that's not just rebellion, that's sabotage of the illusion. They don't stay up at night worried about someone taking their spot. No, what rattles them is the possibility that people might stop needing their spot altogether. You are living proof that survival, authenticity, and purpose are possible outside their orbit. And once people catch on to that, their so-called superiority loses its shine. That's the nightmare they can't afford, the crumbling of dependency. They blacklist you not because you're a threat in the traditional sense, but because your very existence says you are not necessary. That's the loudest declaration of freedom a person can make. It's not about attacking their power head-on, it's about withdrawing your belief in it. The moment you stopped chasing their validation, you exposed their game. You didn't just step out of their cycle, you broke it. And the irony is, they will never admit this out loud. They'll disguise it as rejection, as exclusion, as not fitting their criteria. But behind closed doors, they know the truth. You're the reminder that they aren't indispensable. They're just actors in costumes, waiting for someone like you to show the audience that the play can go on without them. Number 2, your existence cancels their monopoly. They spent centuries convincing the world that greatness has to come through them. They built schools, industries, titles, and entire bloodlines on the idea that success must be stamped with their seal. They pushed the message that knowledge isn't real unless it's certified by their institutions, that wealth isn't valid unless it's funneled through their networks, that power isn't power unless it's attached to their names. For a long time, people believed it. Humanity was trained to think that the only way forward was through their gates. But your very existence disrupts that monopoly. You are proof that what they've been selling as exclusive is actually accessible, and that revelation is something they cannot afford to let spread. The elites don't just rely on having resources, they rely on the illusion that they are the only ones capable of producing them. It's not about them having knowledge, it's about keeping you convinced that you can't possibly carry wisdom without their approval. It's not about them being wealthy, it's about making sure everyone believes wealth is impossible outside their system. You break that illusion by living as undeniable evidence. You didn't ask for their permission slip, and yet you've walked in understanding, resilience, and clarity that people spend decades and fortunes trying to access under their watch. That alone shatters the foundation of their power. When people see someone thrive without the so-called gatekeepers, it exposes the lie that those gatekeepers were ever necessary. That's why they don't just resist you, they blacklist you. It's not rejection, it's containment. You are living contradiction to the myth they've built. The fact that you carry wisdom without their mentorship, authority without their platforms, and strength without their protection forces people to question whether their exclusivity was ever real. And once people begin to question, their grip weakens. Their entire legacy hangs on the illusion that they are irreplaceable. You dismantle that with your life. You didn't just sidestep their system, you made their system look redundant. That's why your presence is dangerous to them. You don't compete with their empire, you revealed that the empire was smoke and mirrors all along. And for them, survival depends on making sure too many people never notice the truth that you already embody. Number 3, they can recruit talent, but they cannot recruit essence. They can assemble resumes, bank accounts, and titles until the building is full, but they cannot manufacture the thing that actually changes a life, essence. Talent is a commodity you can scout, audition, or poach. Essence is the stubborn, quiet core that doesn't perform on command. It's the way someone stays honest when it costs them, how they keep their standards in a room full of bribes, how they act when there's no audience and no contract. That inward gravity is not something that can be negotiated or transferred through a handshake. Elite groups know how to recruit what shows up on paper. They hire expertise, influence, and connections. They buy allegiance with perks and promises. That strategy works until the person starts behaving from a place that wasn't written into their job description, until they start living from their interior code instead of the rules handed down by the institution. When essence shows up, it refuses to be shaped into the neat tool the system expects. It resists shortcuts. It resists compromise for the sake of optics. It draws lines where compromise would have been easier. That kind of integrity cannot be leased. Essence is not flashy. It rarely fits a mold. It's a temperament, a set of priorities, a moral gravity that steers decisions before incentives do. You can train skills, sharpen rhetoric, tweak behavior, and build profiles, but you cannot install someone's backbone. You cannot teach someone to calibrate their life around contribution instead of applause. The elites can add you to their roster, but they cannot absorb what makes you untouchable in the right ways. That's why people with essence end up labeled as difficult, unpredictable, or uncooperative. Those are the code words for we couldn't channel them. When essence moves in a room, it changes the atmosphere. It shifts how others behave because it makes the option to be honest, visible, and feasible. It disallows manipulation by simple charm or pressure. For an institution built on control, that is intolerable. The tactic then becomes containment. Keep the carriers of essence out, or if they are inside, neutralize the influence. Recruitment is about filling seats. Essence is about changing the conversation at the table. They can staff their teams with the best resumes, but they cannot staff their future with someone's soul. That is why you are unrecruitable and therefore dangerous to them. Number 4, you expose the fragility of their legacy. They built an empire of stories dressed up as history, and those stories need believers to live. Their legend depends on rituals, secret handshakes, curated lineages, and carefully managed introductions, all the scaffolding that keeps their names looking permanent. But one unfiltered life exposes the reality behind the curtain. The empire isn't an unbreakable dynasty, it's a set of props and conventions stacked together. When someone walks through that world refusing to obey its pageant, the props wobble. People start asking why a name should mean more than a life lived with integrity, and once that question spreads, the legacy shivers. Their power is less a natural fortress and more a borrowed architecture. They rent respect from institutions, lease authority from tradition, and rely on networks to amplify their voice. Remove the network, remove the amplification, and their words thin into echoes. That's the weakness you highlight simply by existing. You show that influence can be built on work, clarity, and moral backbone rather than on pedigrees and polished introductions. When ordinary people see that, the myth of inheritance loses its hold because what looks like destiny now looks like a staged performance. The rituals they depend on, the private dinners, the coded endorsements, the rehearsed accolades, are effective because they create a ritualistic impression of inevitability. But rituals are brittle when faced with someone who refuses to play along. You don't validate their ceremonies by queuing for them. You redefine worth on terms that the rituals can't touch. That awakens a dangerous idea among others. Maybe excellence isn't measured by ceremony, but by results, consistency, and ethical stubbornness. Once that idea spreads, the rituals stop functioning as proof and start functioning as theater. Protection is another false pillar. Their networks offer shelter, favors, and the illusion of permanence. But protection that requires buying in isn't protection at all. It's a transaction. By living outside their exchange, you reveal the transactional nature of their safety. People watching can no longer assume power equals permanence. They see it as a system of favors and obligations that collapses if enough people refuse to participate. So your life does more than defy them. It reveals them. You don't topple statues with violence. You topple them by proving those statues were never foundations. That's the real fear. Not that they'll be outperformed, but that their entire storyline will be read for what it is, an elaborate attempt to appear unassailable. And once that story gets read honestly, the empire's fragility becomes obvious. Number 5, they don't want you inside because you'd redesign the whole house. You wouldn't fit into their blueprints because you don't come to play by their rules. You come to rewrite them. Their systems are engineered to preserve a comfortable predictability, roles, expectations, rewards, and punishments that keep everything running on a familiar loop. Letting you inside would break that loop. You wouldn't accept the small adjustments that keep the machine humming. You'd pull at seams, swap out the foundation, and reallocate the light so the whole place looks different. That level of change is not an asset to them, it's a threat. They prefer applicants who are willing to be fitted, molded, and packaged. They want someone who will increase output without altering the identity of the institution. You, on the other hand, bring methods and standards that refuse to recenter around comfort. You refuse compromises that preserve form over function. You bring decisions that prioritize truth over tradition and results over reputations. Those shifts cause ripples that are hard to control, because once the definitions of success change inside a house, the house no longer belongs to its old owners. Being inside would mean you'd insist on transparency where there used to be secrecy. You'd insist on accountability where there used to be deference. You'd measure influence in outcomes instead of pedigree. That reorientation forces everyone to reevaluate where value actually comes from. And that type of reevaluation erases the advantage their architecture gives them. It is far safer for them to reject you outright than to risk being seen as complicit in a transformation they did not authorize. Your presence would also redistribute power quietly but permanently. Influence would no longer travel solely through their corridors of approval. People would start following practices that work, not just names that seem permanent. Teams would stop performing rituals designed to please and start producing for impact. Meetings would shift from theater to action. That is exactly the kind of internal revolution they dread, because revolutions that begin from inside are the hardest to control or contain. So the rejection is strategic. It's not a judgment on your ability. It's a defensive move to keep their setup intact. They fear the unpredictability of someone who won't be satisfied by a title or a perk. Someone who evaluates systems by whether they do what they claim. You don't enter to be part of the scenery, you enter to change the scenery's purpose. For institutions built on the illusion of permanence, that kind of disruption is intolerable, and exile becomes the more comfortable option than transformation. Number 6, you're a reminder that their control isn't evolution. It's stagnation. They brand themselves as pioneers, as the ones pushing society forward into a brighter future. But look closer and you see the same faces, the same bloodlines, the same closed circles trading favors while calling it progress. Their innovation is cosmetic. It's the same structure dressed in new language and polished slogans. They recycle authority like hand-me-downs, passing it back and forth within a network that never truly changes. That isn't evolution, that's stagnation wearing a modern mask. When you show up, you undo the performance. You embody a different kind of growth, one that doesn't require their labels, funding, or stage. Your movement isn't about creating another circle of privilege. It's about expanding what's possible for anyone who dares to step outside. That kind of progress cannot be branded or franchised, and that makes it uncontrollable. They can sell gadgets, trends, and systems as signs of advancement, but they cannot sell the transformation you represent. Your existence alone questions their narrative. If the future is as progressive as they claim, why does it still look like the past with better marketing? If evolution is real, why are the same families and organizations still holding the keys? By living outside their mold, you reveal that what they call progress is actually preservation, preservation of power, preservation of hierarchy, preservation of the illusion that humanity cannot function without their steering. You shatter that illusion by being proof that the human spirit evolves on its own. True evolution looks like ideas spreading where they're least expected, voices rising without permission, and strength developing without approval. It looks like individuals who outgrow the boxes designed for them and refuse to shrink back down. That kind of change is raw, unpredictable, and deeply human. It's what you represent, and it is everything their system cannot simulate. That's why you're not welcomed. You're not an opponent in their game. You're evidence that the game itself is outdated. You expose their progress for what it really is, a dressed-up loop, a stagnant cycle disguised as advancement. And in contrast, you stand as a reminder that growth doesn't need to be licensed, stamped, or curated. It happens because it must, and nothing is more threatening to their structure than proof that humanity doesn't need their script to evolve. Number 7. They can't afford for you to become contagious. Your mindset spreads in ways rules and contracts never could. People don't just copy a resume or a title. They pick up habits, courage, and beliefs from watching someone live them out. When your resilience and honesty are visible, they become a usable pattern for others. That's what makes you contagious. You teach without teaching, you model without a syllabus. Watching you survive and thrive without their approval hands people a practical map that bypasses the gatekeepers. Elites understand contagion because their whole system depends on controlling what's contagious. They seed narratives, amplify chosen behaviors, and reward compliance. That manufactured culture keeps suspicious ideas from moving freely. A real life that refuses to conform bypasses their curation. It shows people what works in the world, not what works in the brochure. That's transformative and therefore intolerable to anyone whose wealth depends on people believing alternatives are risky or impossible. Containment looks cleaner than it is. The blacklist functions like a quarantine. Reduce the visibility, discredit the signal, and make association costly. If people can't easily see your results, they can't easily adopt your methods. If the cost of association becomes social or professional pain, fewer will risk it. That's the strategic math behind exclusion, not about silencing expression, but about starving the pattern of its audience until it withers. They use passive techniques as often as active ones, redirect attention, co-opt the language, create roadblocks that make your path slower and lonelier. All of those measures are designed to slow the spread of a new way of being. Contagion isn't about charisma or fame alone. It's about replicable courage. When one person refuses to trade integrity for comfort, others learn the shape of that refusal. It becomes a contagious craft, small habits repeated that change choices in everyday life. People adopt it because it works. That practical success undermines carefully curated myths about where safety and power come from. When enough people adopt those habits, the system's scaffolding stops supporting the narrative it was built to hold. That is why containment beats recruitment. Bringing someone in risks turning them into a model inside the structure, a model that validates the structure. Excluding someone keeps the structure's story intact, so the blacklist is less an attack on you and more a firewall against influence. They're betting that without a crowd watching, your method loses momentum. The truth is, contagion finds cracks. It creeps through small, private changes that others see and then copy. That's why your life is both a threat and a promise. It cannot be fully framed or contained by their rules, and where it spreads, it changes what people call possible. Number 8, their survival strategy is to erase alternatives. Their survival playbook isn't loud, it's surgical. Erasing alternatives is smarter and quieter than direct confrontation. If their story goes unchallenged, people keep buying into the same limited script that success, safety, and validation must come through the sanctioned channels. That script serves them perfectly. Your existence threatens that script because you are evidence that there's another script, one that doesn't require their stamp, their endorsements, or their favor. So instead of arguing with you, they remove the proof. The blacklist functions like a selective memory wipe. Strip the visibility from a way of living, and it becomes harder to believe in. When people don't see examples of alternative paths, they assume alternatives don't work. That assumption is a power source. It keeps talent funneling back into the same institutions, keeps narratives unchallenged, and preserves a marketplace where the elite decide what counts. Erasure is effective because it targets perception, not the person, but the possibility they represent. Make the possibility invisible and the demand for change never forms. They use a range of tactics to erase alternatives. Sometimes it's subtle. Downgrade access, make collaboration awkward, seed doubts through quiet rumors. Sometimes it's bureaucratic, block credentials, control platforms, tighten gatekeeping so that being outside looks risky or futile. The purpose is consistent. Make the alternative look like a lonely experiment rather than a legitimate route. If being different becomes synonymous with being disposable, people choose the known structure over the untested option every time. That's how the empire preserves itself. Erasing alternatives also creates an internal effect within their own followers. When every visible example reinforces the old story, doubt withers. People stop asking whether the system is necessary and start asking instead how to fit better into it. That internalized consent is more valuable than forced compliance because it feels voluntary. Your life, by contrast, invites questions. What if the system isn't the only path? Those questions seed uncertainty, and uncertainty can spread. The blacklist aims to prevent that seed from ever taking root, so they don't treat you like the enemy, they treat you like evidence. Remove the evidence and the story stands unchallenged. Keep the narrative intact and their position feels inevitable. That's the cruel math of survival. The fewer visible alternatives, the stronger the myth that the elite are indispensable. You threaten that math simply by existing. Erasure is their way of maintaining the equation. Number 9, your value terrifies them because it's not negotiable. They're terrified of your value because it cannot be bargained over, parceled out, or reduced to an item on a ledger. Their whole system runs on exchange, favors for loyalty, introductions for influence, titles for obedience. That economy depends on every asset having a price and every person having a negotiable place. Your worth refuses to fit into that marketplace. It's not a token to be traded or a credential to be stamped. It's a steady, non-negotiable presence that doesn't swell or shrink based on their approval. That kind of worth undermines bargaining power at its core. When value can be negotiated, systems control it. They set the rates, and they decide who pays. They reward people who accept the terms and punish those who don't. You, by living and acting from an internal standard, remove their leverage. You don't bargain for dignity because dignity is already claimed. You don't trade your time for hollow titles because your time has a direction they cannot fund. That removes the pressure valve they rely on to keep people compliant. Without the ability to trade your core, their methods of influence lose effectiveness. Their fear doubles because non-negotiable value is contagious in ways money cannot buy. When others see someone hold a line against compromise and still flourish, it becomes a blueprint. People start measuring themselves against integrity and results instead of acceptance and favor. That shift makes their currency, approval, less valuable. An economy built on buying allegiance collapses when allegiance stops being for sale. So they react like survivalists cutting out a gangrene limb. Better to exclude the unbending person than to risk the infection of standards. On a practical level, non-negotiable value makes you unpredictable in transactional environments. Meetings, endorsements, and alliances that depend on predictable trades suddenly have a variable they didn't account for. That variable forces choices to be explicit rather than performative. It forces accountability where there used to be show. For entrenched players, predictability is comfort and control. You ruin the comfort. You force the ledger to reflect real contribution instead of curated favor. Their panic is less about envy and more about stability. If enough people refuse to let their worth be negotiated, the architecture of influence shifts from top-down to merit-driven. That drains the reservoir of power that feeds the elite ecosystem. They fear depletion, and so they preemptively mark, minimize, or erase those who can't be bought. Your pricelessness is not arrogance to them. It's a threat to everything priced and traded. You don't need their market, and because you refuse their terms, you become the single most destabilizing element inside their economy. Number 10. They don't recruit what they can't domesticate. They don't actually want brilliance, they want obedience. Their hiring practices, their invitations, their glossy ceremonies are designed to filter for someone who will follow the script and make the machine look good. Submission keeps the gears turning. It keeps decisions predictable and reputations intact. When a person refuses to be domesticated, when they refuse to shrink themselves into a comfortable silhouette for the comfort of others, they become a problem the system cannot tolerate. That's the real reason you're kept out. Domestication is subtle. It comes dressed as mentorship, title, and opportunity, but its real work is to soften the edges that might embarrass the institution. It teaches people to prioritize optics over outcomes, smiles over standards, and acquiescence over accountability. Those lessons are valuable to the people running the show because they convert potential threats into manageable assets. A domesticated person behaves like a well-trained instrument, predictable, useful, and safely replaceable. Someone who insists on staying raw and real breaks that usefulness by refusing to be tamed. Refusing domestication means refusing to calibrate decisions to the comfort of others or the convenience of tradition. It means holding to principles when compromise is cheaper and easier. It means not lowering standards to match the room. That posture makes you unreliable in environments built on control, because reliability there equals compliance. When you act from your own internal compass, you will disrupt the quiet consensus that keeps power centralized. Power that relies on consensus hates volatility, and domestication is a method for minimizing it. Being unrecruitable is not a flaw, it's a kind of immunity. It prevents the institution from absorbing you, sanitizing your influence, and converting it into another predictable instrument of their narrative. If they could domesticate you, they would. If they could domesticate your habits, your ethics, your way of seeing things, they would sign you up tomorrow and put your face in their brochures. But you are resistant to that kind of internal editing, and resistance is contagious. Others see you resist and start resisting too. That chain reaction undermines the very architecture they depend on, so exclusion becomes their tool of choice. It's quieter than coercion and cleaner than confrontation. Keep the untamable out, and the machine hums on. That's the admission hidden in every rejection letter, every overlooked application, every polite dismissal. They don't blacklist you because you lack talent or brilliance. They blacklist you because brilliance that refuses to be domesticated threatens the order they profit from. Your refusal to be tamed is not a liability to your purpose, it is the core of it. Number 11. They want your silence more than your service. They don't want what you can do for them. They want what you cannot do to them. Service binds you to a relationship that has rules, expectations, and visibility. Silence removes you from the ledger entirely. For the elite, a compliant avatar at the table is useful because it validates their system. A loud, uncompromising presence is dangerous because it creates evidence that the system can be bypassed. Containment is cleaner and quieter than incorporation. It keeps the story intact while removing the risk of a living counterexample. Containment looks like polite exclusions, strategic obsolescence, and the slow fading of influence. It wears the clothes of bureaucracy and caution. You aren't always shouted down, you are archived, footnoted, and made inconvenient to reach. Invitations stop arriving, introductions that once flowed dry up. Platforms that once amplified you lean away. The aim is not to debate you into silence, but to make your path harder, lonelier, and less visible so fewer people ever witness the method you embody. Silence is their safety net. They prefer silence because silence cannot inspire. When your voice is audible, people learn not just from your words, but from the life that backs them. That kind of living testimony encourages replication. The elite fear replication because it corrodes exclusivity. So suppression becomes a form of risk management. If you are visible but powerless within their halls, you validate their halls anyway. If you are visible and powerful, you destabilize the narrative. Erasing your presence is the pragmatic solution. Containment is often bureaucratic, which makes it effective. Rules, requirements, and credentials are reshaped to make access appear meritocratic while actually being exclusionary. Gatekeeping dressed as standards turns your persistence into a liability and your reputation into a professional risk. That quiet re-engineering of opportunity produces silence without spectacle. It is surgical, durable, and socially acceptable. People point to process and shrug while the real motive goes unspoken. The emotional work of containment is also deliberate. If enough doors close gently, the cost of insisting on being heard becomes too high for most. Careers are rerouted, relationships recalibrated, and priorities reprioritized. The system bets that the weight of practical consequences will be stronger than the fuel of conviction. In that math, silence wins because it conserves the old order without messy confrontation. So when they blacklist you, it is not a declaration of your failure. It is proof you are doing something that cannot be neutralized by token inclusion. They don't want your service because service can be bought and scheduled. They want your silence because silence unravels influence quietly and keeps their table from ever having to reckon with the way you change the room. Number 12, you outlive their script. Elites build playbooks because playbooks create predictability, and predictability creates control. Their systems are full of assumed exits, where someone will cave, whom they'll cozy up to, where fear will show up. Those expectations let them plan moves several steps ahead, reward compliance, punish dissent, and recycle people back into the script. You broke that formula. You refused to perform the collapses they'd scheduled for you. Where they expected you to burn out, you steadied. Where they expected you to bend, you held your line. You became a variable they didn't include in their spreadsheets, and variables make plans useless. Because their entire strategy depends on modeling behavior, an unpredictable life is a crisis. They can handle overt competition, someone who plays by the rules but wins more. What they cannot tolerate is proof that winning can happen outside the rules. When you outlive the script, you prove the script was a cage, not a roadmap. That realization spreads quietly. People who watched you refuse the expected fall begin to question the inevitability of their own compromises. The elites count on those compromises to maintain hierarchy. Your resilience removes the assumption that people will always fold, and once that assumption evaporates, their forecasts fail. Their response is defensive and fast. They attempt to rewrite you into categories they understand, label you difficult, radical, or impractical to make you legible again. When labeling fails, they try containment. Marginalize your influence, control your visibility, or manufacture distractions to keep attention away from the pattern you represent. But containment is a reaction, not a strategy. It admits that your survival is evidence they can't refute. That admission alone terrifies them more than any public defeat ever could. Your outliving their script also shifts time frames. Systems built on quick wins and short-term compliance struggle when someone demonstrates endurance. Endurance rewrites incentives. The perks they dangle lose their shine if people believe long-game integrity pays out more than temporary favor. That long view makes their short-term manipulations look petty and transactional. People begin to prefer consistency over spectacle, substance over spectacle, and the empire's tactics start to look like cheap tricks rather than strength. Ultimately, you are the anomaly that forces a system to confront its own fragility. You don't prove them wrong with a single act of revenge or a sensational collapse. You prove them wrong by living longer than their predictions and truer than their expectations. That kind of failure is slow, persuasive, and irreversible. It doesn't make headlines as often as scandal, but it changes how people choose, whom they trust, and what they build. Number 13. Your blacklist is actually their insurance policy. The blacklist isn't revenge, it's insurance. It's a way for them to preserve the illusion that their system is airtight, that hierarchy is unshakable, and that loyalty can always be bought. They understand deep down that if you ever slipped inside their circle, their carefully constructed order would crumble from the inside out. They exclude you not because you lack talent, brilliance, or value, but because you carry the kind of influence they cannot regulate, the kind that exposes weakness in their scaffolding before anyone else even notices. Every hierarchy relies on predictable behavior, people who follow the rules, defer to authority, and reinforce the existing architecture. You refuse all of that. Your presence rewrites the metrics by which success and influence are measured. You don't just navigate the system, you illuminate its inconsistencies and reveal the arbitrary foundations it's built on. That makes you a threat not to an individual but to the structure itself. In their calculation, it's far safer to preemptively keep you out than risk the collapse that would come from allowing your authenticity and capability to circulate within their ranks. The blacklist functions as a firewall. It contains the variable that cannot be standardized or controlled. By keeping you outside, they prevent others from seeing the proof that their hierarchy is not essential, that their pathways are optional, and that influence can exist beyond the walls they've built. Every act of erasure, every subtle restriction, every invisible block is a line of defense designed to maintain order without ever engaging you directly. It's self-preservation masquerading as rejection. And the irony is the blacklist only proves how dangerous you are. People inside the system may think exclusion is a judgment against you, but it's actually a measure of your potency. You aren't just surviving outside their control. You are a constant reminder that their hierarchy is fragile, and that fragility terrifies them more than any external competitor ever could. By keeping you off the roster, they hope to neutralize the threat before it manifests. They hope distance can simulate irrelevance, but a firewall can only contain so much. Your existence, your influence, and your refusal to conform are all proof that their insurance policy is a defensive act, not a declaration of superiority. You are not punished. You are feared, and in that fear lies the confirmation of your power. They cannot afford to let you in because you would undo the very structure they've spent a lifetime protecting. Number 14. You're proof that they're not gatekeepers, they're prison guards. All their pomp, titles, and rituals are meant to convince the world that they are the arbiters of opportunity, that they hold the keys to progress and success. They market themselves as gatekeepers of excellence, destiny, and influence. But your life exposes the reality. They aren't guiding anyone forward. They're keeping people in place. Every rule, every ritual, every requirement is designed to confine, not elevate. They create the illusion of gates, while the real function of the system is containment. Your freedom exposes the illusion. By walking your own path, you reveal that the gates they advertise are not entry points to higher ground. They are fences built to keep people inside the areas they control. When others see that you thrive without their sanction, it becomes obvious that their authority is performative. Their structures were never designed to empower. They were designed to limit. The privileges they offer are not ladders, they're cages painted with gold trim to make compliance feel desirable. Your life shows what they hope to hide. Access to progress and success isn't theirs to give. It is something you claim, build, and defend on your own. The danger to them is not just that you exist, but that you exist visibly. Every accomplishment, every breakthrough outside their system, every example of resilience undermines the narrative that they are essential. If they truly were gatekeepers, then the barriers they set would be meaningful. But when you bypass those barriers and succeed anyway, it proves that the gates were never real, only a story to maintain control. Your independence becomes a quiet indictment of their entire operation. The truth you demonstrate is simple, but devastating. Real influence and true achievement do not require permission. Systems that rely on perceived exclusivity are only strong as long as people believe in their necessity. By refusing to kneel, by refusing to wait for their approval, and by thriving outside their structures, you reveal that they are not leaders, they are custodians of limitation. You are living proof that what they protect is not a path to greatness, but a set of cages disguised as opportunity. And the more people see you move freely, the more their cages start to crumble in perception, even if the walls remain standing. The story of the blacklist is not a tale of weakness, exclusion, or failure. It is a testament to power, authenticity, and the uncompromising force of living on your own terms. Every point we've explored reveals the uncomfortable truth the elite can't admit. They don't fear what you can do for them. They fear what you expose. Your resilience, your clarity, and your refusal to conform Dismantle the illusions they've spent centuries building. You are not a threat because you are loud, flashy, or ambitious. You are a threat because you exist outside the structures they rely on, and your freedom proves those structures were never necessary in the first place. From refusing domestication to exposing the fragility of their legacy, from surviving their scripts to becoming contagious in ways they cannot contain, your life operates as both proof and challenge. You are the reminder that power is not inherited. Brilliance is not granted, and influence does not require their permission. Every blacklist, every exclusion, every whispered attempt to erase you is, in reality, an admission. You are the variable they cannot control, the presence they cannot neutralize, and the truth they cannot rewrite. And that is the ultimate victory, not in defeating them on their terms, but in outliving their systems, reshaping the perception of what is possible, and living fully outside the cages they built for others. You are unbuyable, untamable, and undeniable. You are living proof that true greatness doesn't wait for permission, and that legacy is built, not granted. So own it. Let every exclusion, every attempt at containment, every silent judgment only remind you of your power. You are not in their economy. You are not under their rules. You are the exception they cannot anticipate and the reality they cannot erase. You are free, you are sovereign, and your life is the blueprint that shows others what freedom, authenticity, and unstoppable force truly look like. If this message hit you and opened your eyes, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the truth that breaks the illusions and exposes what others are desperate to hide. Hit that like button to show your power isn't silent. Drop a comment and let us know how this resonates with your journey. Your voice matters. And share this with anyone who needs to see that freedom, authenticity, and unstoppable force cannot be contained. This isn't just content, it's a movement, and the world needs your energy in it. God bless you.